Welcome to EQUUS Farm Calls, where we take horse owners along with us to discuss important topics on equine health and care with industry experts. Today, we'll talk about changing seasons in equine nutrition with Dr. Clair Thunes. I'm Kim Brown, group publisher of the Equine Health Network. The EQUUS Farm Calls podcast is brought to you in 2022 by Farnam, your partner in horse care. Admit it, bugs suck. They're the last thing you want hanging around your horse and stable. Our friends at Farnam can help you rid your barn of these annoying, filthy, disease-carrying bad guys. If you're ready for the best way to protect your horse, your stable, and yourself, look to Farnam's no-fly zone solution. The people over at Farnam have discovered the best way to set yourself up for success is by fighting on all fronts. With their three-stage approach of block, repel, reduce, you can be sure flies, mosquitoes, and ticks are kept away. Go to farnam.com, that's FARNAM.com, to learn more and download a free copy of the Horse Owner's Guide to Creating Your Own No-Fly Zone. Plus, you can find money-saving offers to help you get you on your way to a fly-free zone. Farnam, your partner in fly control. Thunes, PhD, MS, is the owner of Clarity Equine Nutrition based in Arizona. She specializes in creating individual feeding programs for a wide range of horses, including high-performance athletes, senior equines, and horses afflicted with metabolic or other physiological conditions. Welcome, Dr. Thunes.
Hi, Kim. It's great to be back.
Well, we sure do appreciate you coming back. Our audience enjoyed your podcast with you back in January on hay and feed prices. So we're very glad to have you back again to talk about changing seasons in equine nutrition. And I know when we were talking before we started recording the podcast that you said the basis of pretty much everything we're going to talk about is body condition score. So we wanted to just kind of reiterate for our audience body condition score and some of the levels that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good skill for horse owners to hone. It's something I encourage all my clients to do at least once a month, right? Just stand back, objectively look at your horse, put your hands on your horse. And I think that in the winter is really important, especially if you don't clip your horse. I've certainly, personally, I remember as a kid having a pony that we loaned out to somebody that ended up being quite underweight. And unfortunately, the person who we'd loaned it to just, didn't put their hands on it and was pretty actually mortified when we pointed out, under all that hair, there's not a lot of weight. So it is really important for us to put our hands on. And, in the winter, we put blankets on, we cover them up a lot. We're often, I remember going out and, trudging around in the dark with a headlamp on, it's like after work and what have you. So sometimes we don't even see our horses in really good light if we're going out to feed at 5:30 and again at 5:30 in the evening. It may only be the weekends we see them in really good daylight. So I really encourage owners to learn about body condition scoring. It was initially developed by Dr. Henneke at Texas A&M as part of his PhD program back in the 1980s, I think it was. And it sort of got extrapolated across all kinds of horses and used everywhere. But it's for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a 9-point scale. Some countries and some people use a 5-point scale, but Henneke's original system was a 9-point scale with a number 1 being extremely emaciated and a number 9 being extremely fat. And so most of our horses we want in the middle, about a 5, which we call moderate. But, if you're somebody that has an elite, event horse, race horse, polo pony type horse, that might be a 4 and it might be fine. If you have a brood mare, you're going to maybe want her a little bit, closer to a 6. But we really sort of want to stay in that 4 to 6 window. And let's be honest, a lot of us have horses that are creeping upwards of 6. And are getting a little closer to the 7s and 8s. And I've been guilty of that myself. And again, it's hard when you see them every day to really notice that they're just getting a little rounder than they should be.
Yeah. I think we've all had that issue, and it's really hard, especially if you have one of those, a pony, a donkey, some of these that are just quarter horses that just tend to be air ferns.
Oh, golly. I mean, my daughter's pony, we arrive at the barn and it's, every time you arrive, and it's very hard to say no to the.
I'm starving.
Yeah, exactly. It's just so cute. And we get there and she goes, oh, look at you. It's just kind of, so yeah, I get it. But that's where the condition scoring is really useful because it's much more objective. And, you can download, you can find it online. If you Google Henneke equine body condition scoring, you can find this nice chart and you just follow the chart and you take your emotions out of it. And what you see and what you feel is what you have. And my clients, I make all my consultation clients do this before we work together, and many of them are surprised one way or the other, actually, when they really have to do it, what they've really got. So 5 is, the neck blends smoothly into the body, right? There's not a great big step in front of the shoulder. There's not a lot of crest fat in that neck. The withers are rounded over the spinous processes. That's a little tricky, right? Because you've got that one of those shark fin thoroughbreds. You may never get a lot of flesh build up on the withers. So you do have that sort of have an allowance for kind of breed type a little bit. Shoulder blends smoothly into the body. So that's that kind of the back of the shoulder in front of the girth. Some horses get some pretty squishy fat in that area. The ribs, I think we're all obsessed with ribs. We really, we kind of, when you say to somebody, is that horse overweight or underweight, I think the first thing they look at is the rib cage area, right? I think we're all sort of just attuned to doing that. And if you stand back and look at the horse's rib cage, if you cannot see ribs, then that horse, in that area of that horse, scores a 5 or higher. If you can see ribs, then it scores less than a 5 for that area. And I should point out that I condition score in a way that I score each of the 6 areas individually, and then I take an average.
Oh, okay.
The reason I do that is because we sometimes get what we call these regional fat deposits, especially in the metabolic horses. So cushionic horses, for example, some of them you can see their ribs, but they've got a lot of crest fat. And by doing each of the areas individually, to me, like horses should be uniformly fat or uniformly thin, right? They should sort of be a 5 all over or a 6 all over. And if I'm scoring a 7 on the neck and a 4 on the ribs and a 6.5 on their butt, I'm like, what is going on here? Like that, to me, that's often a red flag that there's some metabolic issues going on that I need to look into a little bit more. So I find it really useful to do it in these sections. Other people do it different ways. I also start off by reading the 5 description and saying, is that what I see and feel? And then I go up and down from there and score each point. So the back area on a 5 is level, right? It's flat. You don't have like an A-frame mountain peak. You don't have a valley going down the back. Now, again, halflingers and those sorts of breeds probably always have a valley going down their butt, although the sporty ones sometimes don't. So yeah, it's a little bit, breed specific. And then the tail head, fat around the tail head begins to feel spongy as a 5. And so that's sort of our ideal. And so, yeah, it's good to get familiar with that scoring system.
Well, all I can say is I'm glad in the winter they don't body condition score me because I probably wouldn't do well. But that's a good point, though. That kind of leads us right into weather. So a lot of times this time of year, we're getting into fall. We know winter is coming. A lot of times we're, not as active with our horses when the weather's cooling down. Right. But then we also mentioned a couple other things, and we'll talk about these individually. In some areas like where you are in Arizona, it's going from so hot, I don't want to see my horse anywhere outside of air conditioning. So if it cools off, you're ready to do more work.
Absolutely.
And then there's a lot of people who escape the heat and travel somewhere else, or the cold, they escape the cold and travel someplace warmer. So let's start with for a vast majority of folks in the U.S., it's going to go from warm to cool here in the next couple of months. And they may not be riding as much, and the pastures aren't giving us as much, and we may be looking to transition our feed. So what are some of the things we need to watch for and look out for and be aware of?
Yeah, those are all great points. And when I start off with that condition score, and at this time of year, I find it's really good to say, what do I have right now, right? Because now if I have an older horse who's underweight going into winter, I have kind of a 2-month window right now to get some weight on that horse before the weather really turns, right? So that's something I have to think about. Do I have a horse that's going into winter with a little bit more flesh cover? I don't have to worry about it so much. So those are good starting points. And as you say, what's my work going to be like? I mean, have I been riding 5 days a week after work, or, including weekends, but my barn doesn't have arena lights. So, once the evenings draw in a little more, like those 5 days off, I'm going down to a 2-day, so the weekend warrior model, because I just, I don't have anywhere to ride in daylight after work once the evenings get dark. And I think it's a pretty common mistake that people don't adjust their feed, according to work done. And that is, that's a really big one. And, let's be honest, it doesn't get super cold, September, October, but our working levels can go down with those evenings drawing in. And there can be that temptation, if you've had a pretty fit, active horse all summer, that you're just going to keep feeding it the same way, even though you're only riding twice a week now. The weather's not that cold yet, so they're not really burning that much, keeping warm yet. So, you can accidentally, end up gaining a little more condition on some horses, especially the easier keeper horses. So it is important to pull our concentrate feed back according to work. If you're somebody that is feeding, a performance feed, a lot of horses go into, even if they are being ridden 5 days a week, maybe they've been on a pretty rigorous show schedule. End of year championships point, things are kind of wrapping up in September. A lot of horses kind of go into that winter training mode before they come out in the spring.
Yeah.
Or as you said, some people, it's the opposite. I mean, like our horses here in Arizona really have just been doing their training, ticking over sort of 30-minute rides all summer. And looking at my calendar, we're about to start going out every weekend, so competing and doing things. So we'll be going the other direction. So where, for example, our personal horse has been just sort of on a pretty minuscule amount of balancer, and, he'll actually bump up a little bit and probably get a little bit more come middle of September because he'll be working harder.
And horses that are going to be traveling, whether it's, warmer to cooler or cooler to warmer, depending on the season, because, and as the horses maybe go from the Northeast or down to Florida or down Southern California or whatever,
right,
or then they transition back. What are the things we need to look out for when we're traveling and going to a different climate? It may be cooling off at home, but it may be still pretty warm where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get a lot of snowbirds come down here to Arizona. They come down for the whole winter. They'll start arriving sort of end of October. Some of those horses are on pasture up north. They're coming down from, the Illinois, the Iowas, the Michigans, or whatever, Dakotas, and they're coming down here for the winter, and they're on pasture all summer. And they come down here. We don't have pasture really down here. Florida's pastures, they do have pasture, but it's more what I would call like mental health pasture.
Yeah.
Southern California, you're not really going to find pasture. So those horses, that's a big change from a predominantly wet forage source to a dry forage source. And that can be the same, even if you live in like New England and you don't go anywhere for the winter, right? It's unlikely that your horse is going to be, it might have been out on pasture 24/7 all summer, and now at the very least it's coming in at night, and your pastures are going dormant and there's not much out there. So we do see an increase in colics in the fall, and it's not so much the weather as it is we radically change their management. Right? We don't ride them, perhaps we don't ride them as much. Movement is important for gut peristalsis, right? Things just moving through the digestive tract. Walking around a pasture will do that for you too. And so if you're suddenly now in a 12 by 12 box stall, when you were walking around, the moisture content of grass, we don't think about that very much. Grass is really wet. So about 85% of grass is water. And of course, when we make hay, we take that wet grass and we leave it out in the sun for 4 or 5 days to dry. We evaporate out all that moisture. So the hay that we're feeding is the opposite. It's only, at the most 15% water. Really, better quality hay is closer to 10% water. So that's a big difference. And so we really want to make sure our horses are drinking well when we make that switch from grass to hay. We all think about feeding electrolytes in the summer, but feeding salt in the fall and through the winter is just as important. I would argue possibly sometimes more important to keep them drinking. So, your 2 tablespoons of salt every day for your average size horse is really cheap colic insurance to help keep them drinking. And when you're on the road and you're going a long way, you get the same as showing, right? Your water sources change. You take a horse that's used to living on a well, and now you put him on municipal water that's got chlorine in it, and he doesn't want to drink it very well.
Yeah.
So offering a bucket that's got something like an electrolyte in it, or apple juice, or Kool-Aid, or something to kind of mask the water can be helpful. But you kind of need to start that before you leave home, because the Kool-Aid is going to be weird if you just suddenly go somewhere new and put apple juice, apple cider vinegar, whatever it is, Gatorade in your water, and you've not done that at home before you left. It's not going to help, right? It's going to still be weird.
Right.
So you have to start that at home. And you really need to make sure you have a plain bucket. Always give a plain bucket, because, they need a choice. So those are some big ones. Traveling is hard on the gut. It's hard on the microbiome. The stress, a lot of these places, it's well over a 12-hour haul to get to wherever it is you're going. Sometimes it's, 24 hours in a trailer, and that's really stressful. There's been studies where they've looked at, the effects of tying up a horse's head for multiple hours and being in a trailer. It negatively impacts the immune system. Cortisol levels are higher. So these are all things to think about too, if you are making a long haul this winter and changing north to south or whatever. Having your horse on a good sort of prebiotic or something that's going to help stabilize the digestive tract. Changes of hay. I mean, we can get Timothy here in Arizona, but it's extremely expensive. So we mostly have access to alfalfa, Bermuda, sometimes some teff. I mean, if you come down from the north and, you have access to Timothy and brome and meadow hay and all this kind of thing, you may not find that down here. It's certainly not at a price that's, sustainable, going back to what we talked about in January. So, changes in hay, take some hay with you, right? Take a bale so that you've got 5 or 6 days worth of hay to transfer to new hay, because that's a big, we know that when you change types of hay, your colic risk goes up for about 3 weeks. And type of hay, people always think, oh, Timothy to Bermuda or whatever. No, type of hay could be Timothy to Timothy. We forget that chemically, from a nutrition standpoint, it says Timothy on the outside, but on the inside, it can be very different. The amount of sugar, the amount of starch, the amount of protein, it can be very different. And that takes a while for the gut microbes to adjust to. So it's really important to try and take some hay with you, even if you're just going to be going from one kind of hay to another, that's the same type of hay.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about, we talked about sometimes our horses get a little pudgy and you need to touch them and feel them, but there are just some horses that, and I think as a horse owner, it's because I'm like, okay, I want to feed them more because it's winter, it's cold, there's weather, all that kind of stuff. But then you get to spring, and even if you've, had blankets and you've been checking them, they kind of creep up and they pudge up during the winter. So what can you do to avoid actually feeding your horse too much through the winter?
Yeah, I think, continuing to condition school, getting yourself a weight tape, putting a weight tape on them. But I think we have to stand back sometimes. And I'm a big one for looking at how did horses actually evolve? Right, I start there when I think about how I feed a horse in general, right? They're designed to eat forage. Right, if they were left to their own devices, they would eat some kind of forage for probably 16 plus hours a day. And that's, they're designed for little and often, trickle meals of forage, high STEMI, low nutritional value forage. we don't tend to feed them that way. We tend to feed them twice a day and forages that are actually quite high quality. So the more you can think about how they're designed to be fed and how their anatomy evolved to kind of meet that niche that they filled, the better off we probably do by them. And we have to remember that, they lived in grassland plains and open spaces and ate what was available to them. And if we've ever managed a pasture, that pasture is better quality at some times of the year than it is at other times of the year. And most of our pastures, especially in the northern climates, go dormant, somewhat dormant in the winter. The Bermuda type pastures certainly do. And somehow the horses got by with that, right? And they walked a lot, they went a long way, they'd go find something else to eat. We make their lives very easy from a nutrition standpoint. We just sort of give them a platter with okay, we don't maybe do it right. We do it in meals. We don't make it constant, but we give them this much better quality nutrition and they don't have to walk anywhere to get it. So I think if we could, let them struggle a little bit more sometimes, some of those easy keepers, right? Don't make it quite so easy for them. Let them lose some weight. Horses in the wild I was lucky enough to grow up on the edge of Dartmoor in England, and we have Dartmoor ponies that live, they're managed by people and they're owned by somebody, but they are sort of free roaming on the national park, and they lose weight in the winter. They, sometimes they come out looking poorer than you would like, but they lose weight in the winter. The spring appears, the grass appears in the spring, and they will gain weight again. And there's a reason why mares foal out the time of year they do. They foal out when the grass is coming up with lots of nutrition in it to support their lactation and their growing foals. And they go into this time of year, they're pretty fat and sassy, and they go into the winter and they gradually lose it again. And we don't let horses do that, anymore. We kind of keep them on this maintained plane of nutrition that in reality is often slowly creeping upwards plane of nutrition. So do you really have to put a blanket on your horse? Does he really need a blanket? I'll be honest. I often put a blanket on because it's more convenient for me. I don't have a lot of time after work in the winter time to be grooming off a lot of mud if I do want to ride. So for me, I clip and blanket because it's a convenience to me. But, would it be better if my horse was overweight to, not clip him and not put a blanket on him and let him, burn a few more calories, keeping warm? Maybe. Every horse is an individual, so it's very difficult to make a, no pun intended, blanket statement. But, you kind of have to, step back a little bit and just think, there's some things little changes I could make in my management that would mean he'd have to burn a few more calories, to keep warm. And then I could feed him more because I could, I could keep more hay in front of him. I could feed him more naturally because he'd be burning those calories to keep warm, right? Conversely, if you have the harder keeper, it's the total opposite, right? If you have that horse that tends to lose weight through the winter, maybe consider putting a blanket on him, help him insulate himself so he isn't having to burn calories to keep warm. And you may find that your feed bill goes down because you're not having to put as much food in front of him to help him keep warm. So it goes both ways, right? And you just have to look at them as individuals. But we have, I'm certainly not advocating letting horses get underweight at all. Right. At all. I want to make that super clear. But I think that sometimes we can let nature help us. If you're the person that's been putting a muzzle on their horse, all day, every day, all summer, and it's just like you've got the air fern, and it's so difficult to manage those horses. Winter can be a bit of a relief. Yeah,
I love it. Put them out. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Thunes, for joining us today on EQUUS Farm Calls. And we really thank our audience for joining us, and we welcome your input and hope you'll tell your friends. And if you have any suggestions or comments, feel free to contact me at kbrown, that's the letter K Brown, at equinenetwork.com. EQUUS Farm Calls is a production of the Equine Podcast Network, an entity of the Equine Network, LLC.